Welcome to Power in Numbers. I'm your host, Crystal Echohawk. In 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General's office declared a nationwide loneliness epidemic. Isolation is no longer just a personal struggle, it's a public health crisis. Today, we're examining how isolation and disconnection are reshaping our mental health, our relationships, and even our democracy. How do we rebuild connection and belonging and a shared humanity in a culture that often pushes us apart? To help us dive into the subject in the C-suite today, we have the queen of polling, Celinda Lake. At the roundtable, we'll talk to the best-selling author and impact strategist, Mike De La Rocha, mental health advocate, TV and filmmaker Mamadou Ndiaye, and Minnesota Senator Mary Kunesh. We'll also hear from comedian Jackie Kali'ia'a. Stick with us. Hi, Celinda. Today we're talking about a topic that has frankly really kind of shocked me, that it was one of the bigger findings in recent research we did, and it was the issue of isolation and loneliness. And it came up with regards to research that we were doing within my community, within the Native American community. But obviously, this is something that we're increasingly hearing about, particularly its impact around men. And so I'm really looking forward to getting into this with you.
Well, I so appreciated your wanting to explore it. And, you know, the irony is we have never been more connected and never been lonelier since we've had data. And then what was so interesting is the sense of connection and the sense of isolation are usually highly correlated. They move along together. But in the Native American community, there was a very strong sense of connection, but still very high isolation. And so what's going on here? Why do you have almost over 40% of the people feeling connected, which is pride and connected
like
to
being
tribe,
proud of who they are and their
identity and culture, but isolated in terms of interactions and social interactions. And then when we went back to other data because I thought, is this true in any other communities? And it was very true in the African American and Latino communities. Not so true in the white community. You moved together. If you felt connected, you didn't feel isolated. But in the Latino community in particular, it's very much like the Native American community. You could feel connected to your heritage and your pride and your language or your identity, but still feel very isolated. And this is a relatively new epidemic. I mean, it was very controversial when our Surgeon General under Joe Biden said that isolation and loneliness is a public health crisis. And he was kind of derided.
Ridiculed, yeah, and dragged like this isn't like a real issue.
And this is a woohoo kind of issue. And then there's been all this attention to loneliness among young men. But the newest Pew study showed that about equal numbers of women, young women, were expressing loneliness too. It was just that they were more likely to go to their communities and their social support networks, their parents, their dads, their moms, their cousins, their best friend, than men were. Men were more likely to sit in isolation or go online.
But now all we hear about is the impacts of the manosphere and like talking about the impacts on young men, which is a very important conversation. Yeah. But nobody's talking about how this is affecting women. I mean, it really does feel like the dominant conversation is we've got to focus on what this is doing to men when it sounds like we need to be focusing on everybody. This is really, truly an epidemic. But do we understand why we're feeling this way?
Right, because a lot of people attributed it to COVID, and that was the first big realization. But COVID's been a while now. And certainly there are some patterns that have adjusted, like there are more people that are in hybrid work situations, and that can be isolating, but it can also mean better quality contact with your family because you're not spending an hour of your time in your car alone trying to commute back and forth. So I don't think we understand it enough, and I don't think we understand what to do about it. I also feel that we don't understand completely the repercussions. One of the reasons we focused on men is because we know in men it leads to authoritarianism and violence. But we don't really know. And we know in women it often leads to self-harm. But we don't know much about the interventions. We don't know much about what to do or the causes. Why is it continuing? How will it get worse with AI? What do we intend to do about it? And I think also it's probably even bigger than we're thinking, because I think there's still some social bias. I'm stunned at the number of people who will say in a survey, I'm lonely today.
So, Celinda, right now, I'm hoping we can just take a minute to hear an incredible conversation that recently happened on the Ezra Klein Show with Priya Parker, who's the author of The Art of Gathering.
And in America, where the cost of labor is high, you're doing everything yourself, right? You're cooking and you're caring for the kids, and you're not in an intergenerational household where the weight can be distributed among different people, some of whom are working full time, some of whom are not.
Yes.
And you have stay at home, usually women.
Yes.
And it
something's got to give.
Something's got to give. And it seems to me that what gives is community, what gives is hosting.
100%.
It is easier to be alone.
Well, we say that, but it's actually devastating, right?
I should say it is easier on the question of the day to be alone.
Yes. Like if Americans don't gather more, and there's so many ways to do it, we will slide even more into authoritarianism, because we actually don't know each other, right? Every legal expert in authoritarianism basically says the antidote to authoritarianism is connection. And part of modern life, I think, is not assuming that there's a way to host. Not assuming. I almost want to go over there and get this framework of a fancy dinner party or whatever your mental model is of what it means to gather out of your head.
Wow. I mean, Priya Parker, if folks haven't read her book, but really The Art of Gathering. So what do you make of this? Because when I first heard this interview, I was like, wait a minute, did I just hear this right? That this connection between this isolation, disconnection, and the rise of authoritarianism. I'm curious your reaction to that.
I really strongly believe in it. I was really struck by her point about the dinner party, because I have those anxieties. And yet I grew up in a culture of, potluck, and everybody just brings a dish. And in part, economically, people couldn't afford to put the whole dinner party on. And I think that this is something that immigrant communities still maintain in the U.S., but a lot of people who have been here multiple generations, we're losing. We need to get it back.
I think it's sometimes the simplicity of things. After what we just watched happen in Minnesota, it really gave me hope. It felt like maybe we've all been kind of frozen in not knowing what to do, with just this onslaught. This what do they call it? The flooding of the zone, which has been multiple things. It's whiplash every day about what seems to be happening. But to see the power of people standing up and saying things are wrong. If we're increasingly isolated from one another, how do we make change?
Well, and what I loved about Minnesota is people did what they can. Some people gave money. Some people were out there in sub-degree weather. Some people were walking kids to school. Some people were picking up people's groceries or going to a food bank and picking up food for a family. Just that kind of creativity and joining together.
I think what Priya is talking about is the simplicity of gathering, and we don't have to let perfect action get in the way. Imperfect action is better than no action, and just finding very simple ways to come together. When I first did research 8-9 years ago, a lot of people were like, Native Americans are alien to us. We don't know anything about them. They seem very isolated, and we're kind of more into our thing. And I noticed this last round of research that we did with you, a lot of people are like, no, I want to lean across and be allies, but I want that reciprocity. I want to show up as an ally, maybe for Native Americans or for Black community or Latino, but I in turn want people to show up for me. I'm just wondering, is any of that come up beyond our research in other places?
One of the shifts I noticed in your data was people moving from alienation to great curiosity. Now, curiosity is not, there's othering in curiosity too. It's not always so benign. I'm not being naive here. But the idea that, and respect for heritage, respect for the environmental orientation of Native American communities, for family, for food, for tradition, for language, for art.
It just feels like for a while we've been living through such a time of polarization and obviously loneliness. It's showing up. So it feels like we need to find a different way to reconnect and find the we. So
well, and I think this administration is benefiting and trying to separate and divide us. They are causing a lot of the isolation because people are very afraid to put themselves forward now for fear of what the reaction will be on it, even the simplest of policy that a community could have agreed on. And I think they win if we let that happen.
let's switch gears now. And, so much of when we talk about power of the numbers is like actually bringing facts and science and truth, not alternative facts. So what myth can you bust for us today?
Well, one of the myths that I would bust is people think maybe there are 5 or 6 tribes out there. And in our surveys alone, we had 243 tribes represented, which I was blown away by that. You're a lot less able to other people when you realize the diversity and the presence of lots of communities all over America.
I love that. And I think just even to tap onto that, like more and more people are multiracial, right? And I think as opposed
category.
to that being like, that's not a bad thing. That's actually a great thing. So thank you, Celinda.
Thank you for having me.
We asked comedian Jackie Kali'ia'a about what she does with her loneliness and where she finds community. Here's what she had to say.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jackie Kali'ia'a. I'm a stand-up comedian, actor, and writer based in Oakland, California. I'm Urington Paiute. I'm Washoe. I'm Native Hawaiian. I'm from the Bay Area, many generations. I'm your classic urban Indian girl. I can thizzle dance and round dance. When I'm lonely, I know that I have to reach out. It's the last thing that I want to do. Because when I'm lonely, sometimes I get into a place where I'm like, ugh, everyone's busy, people are hard to book. Everyone's got kids and schedules and all these things. I don't want to bother people. But I know that when I get into that headspace, it's really important for me to do just that, bother. And it's not bothering. These are your friends. These are your family. This is what they're there for. So I typically will call my sisters, or I will call one of my good friends and just be like, hey, what you doing? How's it going? And then sometimes I'll vent. And then sometimes we'll just shoot the shit about what's happening in the world. And I feel like that's enough to get started. Okay. And then I typically have to leave my house. I have to get out, go to Lake Merritt, be in the sunshine, see other people, see people just walking their dogs and having a good day, see people on a cute first date. And that reorients me and goes, oh, okay, it's not just my TV and my cell phone and that's my only access to world. I go outside, I be in the fresh air, I go for a walk, that kind of thing. And that kind of tends to ground me and go, oh, okay, we're part of this vast experience here. And I feel a little bit more connected that way. And then even just going to a coffee shop, strolling into a coffee shop, reading a book, having a chat with a stranger, that just feels like it grounds me. I have really close friendships with folks that I grew up with because I'm from the Bay, but I think that I get a lot of my community from artists in the Bay. So I'm a stand-up comic. I've been doing stand-up here for about 15 years. And so many of my friends are folks that I was in a green room with at once, and it's just finding people whose art you like and who you mesh with and whose politics you're down with. And there's just a lot of that happening out here every day. But then also the added layer to all of this is that I am an urban Indian. I'm born and raised in the Bay. My family's been here in the Bay for generations. And so I am very connected to the Native community here in Oakland. And so my niece is dancing. She just had her coming out in December, and it's been really cool to see her be the 4th generation of folks here in the Bay from our family. And so I go to visit her at dance practice. It's a weekly activity at the Intertribal Friendship House. So it's cool because the people that I know and know me know my dad. They played basketball with him in the Indian leagues. They know my grandfather. They played basketball for him and his teams. And so it's very intergenerational here, and there's a level of familiarity that everybody has when I walk into a space like a Native center here in Oakland or in the Bay Area. And I also have that deep community on my mom's side of the family. So on my mom's side, she was Portuguese and Italian. And so I grew up going to what are called festas, which are sort of Portuguese celebrations that happen each year. And I grew up in that space. And that's also a space that I go to. And they know my mom, they knew our family. And so there's a lot of intergenerational presence that I am very fortunate to have here in the Bay because my family's been here for so long.
Now that we've explored some of the trends around and consequences of isolation and loneliness, I'm here with 3 of today's most compelling thought leaders on the subject. Mike De La Rocha is a best-selling author, entrepreneur, and leading voice in men's emotional health. State Senator Mary Kunesh is deeply committed to her community and serves in the Minnesota State Senate. And Mamadou Ndiaye is a comedian, filmmaker, and DJ who also happens to have a degree in cognitive behavioral neuroscience. What a badass. Which I'm sure will come in handy for our discussion today. Welcome to Power in Numbers, Mike, Mary, and Mamadou. Before we get into this really important, deep, kind of troublesome conversation about, isolation, loneliness, but also connection, I really would love to hear from each one of you. What is one thing that's bringing you joy right now? And Mary, let's start with you.
Oh, one thing that's bringing me joy right now is actually two things. I have these two little twin baby grandsons. They were just born about 7 months ago. And I have two older granddaughters, just 3 and 4, though. Those are the things that are bringing me joy in this day and age. And as tired as I am, or as awful as things are out in the big bad world, I know that when I go to spend time with them, or I hold those babies in my arms, the work that we're doing here in Minnesota is worth it for the future of those kids, as well as, like we say, the next 7 generations.
Absolutely. It brought a smile to my face. All right, Mike, what about you? What's one thing that's bringing you some joy?
One thing that's bringing me joy, my children, my partner, and my friends and family, I would say. In these moments, just kind of like what Mary said, we find joy and love in each other than the systems around us. And so I'm really inspired by the ways that people are showing up for their loved ones and even their neighbors that they may not know. So that's giving me hope.
Love that. Mamadou, what about you?
I also was going to say I have a niece and a nephew, and knowing that their brains are not fully cooked yet and they don't have to worry about everything going on out in the world. I used to be a teacher, but like now it's like just an unk. I'm just over here looking at these kids and being like, I want to make sure that this world is somewhere that you want to live in. I want to be involved in that, either as an uncle or potentially a soccer coach. And that's the other thing that's bringing me joy. Love soccer. There's a lot of soccer happening right now, and the kids are starting to walk a little bit. So coach mode is starting to activate.
Excellent. I love that. All right. Well, let's really get into this. So what is going on, particularly in the community that you are living in and working in? And Mike, I want to start with you because, I've heard so much like initially about the manosphere, right? But like, Mike, you were one of the first people, like somebody I've known for a long time, that's really showing me a whole nother side and just like some really important work that's happening. So let's start with you.
Yeah, I think, how do I answer this? I think it's a multifaceted question. I will say my work, I've been blessed to be traveling the country and the world, talking to specifically men and men of color around this issue of isolation and loneliness. And what I definitely see is because of multiple factors, because of the economy, because of social media, a lot of men feel like they're all alone and that other folks are having different experiences or different emotions than they are. Toppled on top of this structure of patriarchy that has conditioned a lot of us to not be emotionally expressive. So when we're not able to ask for help, when we're not able to share how we're feeling, that further polarizes us and brings us away from our own authentic self and each other. I will say like that is dominant, but however, kind of like what everybody is saying, there's an emergence or reemergence, a prophecy, if you will, of folks coming back together in real community. I see it. We may not be able to like publicize it on the algorithm, but I see so many men in men's circles in different groups of folks that are trying to become better people. And so I do think in this time of polarization and isolation, like you said, Crystal, there's another story that's not being told enough that's then further reinforcing this idea that we are completely separated with each other. And that's why I'm a big advocate and fan of just remembering who we are ancestrally and our connection to the earth, to the four-leggeds of each other, the stars, because those are roadmaps that have always been imprinted in our DNA that are for these moments in particular.
I love that. Coming to you, Mary, the research found, which I found really alarming, was that actually while the out of like the, almost 3,000, I think, Native people that we polled all across the United States, the majority of them really had like so much pride in their identity. They had like really high numbers, but actually we're seeing a growing trend of them feeling incredibly isolated. Mm-hmm. How does that playing out in Minnesota and the communities that you're living and working in right now?
Or, when we think of isolation and the effects that it has on our psyche, our social emotional health, and then the historic trauma that is handed down, epigenetically to all of us folks of color from generation upon generation. And we look at isolation within Indian country, Minnesota, in the Twin Cities here, Minneapolis, St. Paul. We have some of the largest urban Indian community in the Twin Cities. And I can tell you that folks came out in droves. This is the homeland of AIM, American Indian Movement. And immediately it kind of triggered that safety sense that we have here in Minnesota when it comes to our communities. I'm the chair of education finance, and today we just had, I presented a bill and we heard about the suicidal rates of children, especially American Indian students. And we know that as this ICE movement went through our Twin Cities, our students were greatly affected because they saw their friends being picked up by ICE, those families being picked up by ICE, the disconnection. And it just created, on the one hand, a growing sense of insecurity and fear, but on the other hand, the recognition that so many people from so many areas stood up to secure and support all of us. And so it's kind of been the good, the bad, and the ugly here.
Yeah, and I found myself getting choked up as you were talking, right? The things that people have had to contend with are crazy. But Mamadou, like, how is this showing up in your community that you're working in and from?
I feel like a lot of people are divesting from being online. I think that not to pair what everyone else is speaking about, but like, everyone feels alone and sees the world reflected of them as mostly doom scrolling. If that's even a term we have, it means that everything seems miserable there. But I think that people are trying to relearn how to try again. I think that this sort of like convenience economy that we've gotten adapted to with social media, where all the information is like fed to you, well, now you're overwhelmed, whether it's Epstein files or it's the news or it's celebrity, like you're being fed so much data. I think that people need some time to take a step back and really learn what to process and also unlearn like very deeply entrenched beliefs, whether it's gendered or racialized or just Americanized, because there is a world out there that, like, this is why I love soccer. It's like, I love seeing people of all different languages and walks of life, but they all speak one language, and it's soccer. And I think I spend a lot of time in my soccer community and being around people who, some people are more like, I just want to play so I can actually talk to people and interact with people in real life. And then they'll tell me, I'll be like, hey, I know it's crazy what's going on over there. You want to talk about it? Grab a little coffee, have a conversation. And I think there's a much more human like interaction that is needed there. And I think that honestly, I have been so optimistic about the conversations that I have with people because I've seen people in all walks of life also like get vulnerable about that, or even getting vulnerable about like, I don't know what to do. And that's the first step into like, well, let's do it together.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and kind of building forward, I just have to call it, like, there is an amazing writer, strategist, author, Priya Parker, who wrote a book called Art of Gathering, but she actually had a really interesting conversation with Ezra Klein recently in the New York Times, connecting isolation and authoritarianism. Mm-hmm. And Mike, what are your thoughts on this relationship between isolation and the rise of authoritarianism?
Yeah, I was going to say, as a lover of words, I think Priya's book, The Art of Gathering, and Malidoma Sommer Patrice's The Healing Nature of Africa, Healing Wisdom of Africa. If you put those two books together, the answer solution is actually very simple. It's just literally being together with people in the outdoors and just having joyful, fun things to do. And I do think, the algorithm wants us to think that we are more separate and divided and fearful of our own shadow than we really are. And that's why I love, I had the opportunity to speak with Priya on the panel last year. And that's her literal book. This is, years before Trump. That first preface is talking about they don't want us to come together. And that's why I think, like, in times of pain, like we're seeing in real time, because there's real pain, there's also that other piece that's happening. And then, it's almost like I'm bookending, which is like that immense amount of love that we have for ourselves and each other. You don't need an entire population to stop what's happening in America or globally. You need a tipping point of the population to wake up and say, you know what, there is a different way to go. And I think if we can just remember that, we'll find a lot more bridges than borders that we have now.
Mary, I mean, I cannot tell you, again, how many times Minnesota has come up, as I've been interviewing people over the course of this podcast series. I want to talk about because I don't think it's enough what we're talking about, the inspiration and the connection. Is there something special in the Minnesota water up there, Mary? We all want to know. Well, we need to replicate it. What do you think that was? Because it was both courage and love, just tremendously on display.
It's amazing how organic the resistance just happened. But it didn't happen, by the usual, within the usual groups. All these mutual aid connections started happening. They started forming within communities. The communication was constant, where it was happening, what was happening. Two of the communities I represent, Columbia Heights and Fridley here, I think we're really the epicenter. You saw the horror of the murders, but we're very large communities of immigrants. And it was just 24/7, ping, 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 ping on my phone. Something's happening here, something's happening there. But it brought out the best in our state. So many people saw the injustice. I would get up every morning and go to different schools in my district to help patrol and watch for ICE in our schools and around our schools. And the people I met doing that, folks with no children, but couldn't stay in their house and watch this happen. That's a testimony that it's not just over now. We're going to continue to do this work to support our communities. And I can't even tell you how proud I am of us.
Unfortunately, we've got to wrap this conversation up. So I want to go to each of you and just what is one thing that you want to encourage people out there listening to this to do? Mamadou, I'll start with you.
It is worse to never try than to try and fail.
Thank you. Mike?
Rest, connect, and go outside.
Mary?
Stop and say hello to everybody, or just say hello and smile at somebody when you walk by. It is amazing what will happen when we recognize each other, even though we don't know each other. It affirms our very presence in that moment, and it's so invaluable.
I love that. This conversation has been medicine. I've several times just tears of joy kind of welling up, but just medicine. So thank you each so much for everything that you brought into this conversation. And special shout outs, Mary. Please send our love, our prayers and appreciation to not only the people you represent, but all people in Minneapolis and Minnesota.
Wopilatanka.
Thank you. Friends, that's it for this episode of Power in Numbers. Thanks again to all of our wonderful guests for joining us, and thanks to you, our listeners, for digging deep with me today. On the next episode, tune in for a conversation on the media power shift and who controls the narrative now with Katie Borum, Akilah Hughes, and Jennifer Bendry. Listen, watch, and subscribe to Power in Numbers wherever you get your podcasts, and follow @Indigenous House on all socials. Let's close out this episode with music medicine from R&B soul artist Love.
Every woman of color, sister or mother, you gotta let your light shine. 'Cause this one is for my girlies going through a hard time. Lessons you've been blessed with.